Came over to the house, the Metal house, and he had Colt 45 malt liquor, which is the worst beer in the world as far as I'm concerned, right? Mm-hmm. Anyways, I go, what the hell are you doing with that? And he goes, it's all I could afford. And I go, man, that stuff sucks. He goes, hey, man, the best beer in the world is the one you got in your hand.
You know, in a world of skinny jeans and all that, here's this guy in big belts just doing shit we'd never heard before. It's crazy.
You know, one of the local bands they said you got to see was Trauma. So I have a vivid memory, like, you know, one of my friends, like, you know, Trauma, you got to see Trauma, like, and, you know, this was like early 82, maybe, you know, before Cliff was associated with Metallica. So, you know, I just remember people saying, you got to see this band Trauma, like, the bass player's amazing. Like, that was, it's not a myth. Like, people were talking about Trauma in terms of the bass player, even back then.
You know, once the first Metal Master came out, there was definitely, you know, a buzz. Surprising to me, basically, but there was a buzz, and I started getting all these demo tapes from people all over the country, all over the world, really, at that point. And one of the demos I got was from these managers up in San Francisco who had sent me the Trauma demo tape, and it was pretty good for, especially the recording was really good. I guess these guys had some money, so they put them in a proper studio.
You know, March 82 or so, the band Saxon were on their first U.S. tour, and they played Palo Alto on the peninsula, and Trauma were the support band. So it was, you know, it was like kind of one of those shows where, like, it was amazing because Saxon, I was a huge Saxon fan, and Trauma, this band who I'd been wanting to see, were opening. So, you know, we got there early to see Trauma, and I was against the stage, and they came on, and they were everything that people had told me they would be. Like, you know, the bass player was fucking amazing. Like, I have a, you know, when Cliff did a solo during the Trauma set, and he used a drinking glass as a slide, and, you know, he was using his wah. Like, you know, I was a teenager. I'd never seen a bass player play like that. You know, Geddy Lee used pedals, and, you know, and Geezer Butler, but, like, you know, he was playing the bass like a guitarist would, like, and he did a slide solo on a bass. So I was against the stage, and, you know, when Trauma finished, they were walking off, and I reached up as Cliff walked by, and, like, you know, I said, you know, whatever, I said, like, you know, great show. And then, like, he slapped my hand, and he said, like, thanks, man, whatever. And, like, I that's still stuck in my head because that was my first encounter with Cliff.
Watching Trauma play, you know, and it was like kind of the worst kept secret in the world at the time was Metallica were there to, like, scope out their potential new bass player, you know, and I just remember watching him solo and just like, that's insane. Who does that on a bass? Even though, you know, we all grew up with, like, you know, Sabbath and Geezer Butler and NIB, you know, we've seen guys solo on a bass, but not with all this overdrive and a wah pedal and furiously headbanging all the while, you know, it's like something else. It's crazy.
And then I can't remember if it was before or after the album actually came out, but Trauma came down to LA to play the Troubadour, which is kind of where all the metal bands were playing. So they came down, and of course, you know, managed to come out and see them. I said, sure, they're on the record. I want to go see them. And I went to see them, and, you know, honestly, the band was okay, but all I did for the entire, 40 minutes of the set was stare at Cliff, because I'd never seen anyone like that before. He was, you know, this big guy with all this hair, and of course dressed all in denim, just a whirling, like, Tasmanian devil on stage. It was just, he was incredible. And, like, the band was all right, you know, they weren't great, but he was unbelievable. I'd never seen anybody perform like that and play so great before. I basically just stared at him the entire time, going, "Oh my God, this is incredible."
I'd gotten a Metallica demo, like June or whatever, and then so that's how I was introduced to Metallica. So I saw Trauma. The tape trading thing was going on with Metallica demo, and over that summer I became a fan of Metallica through their demo. And so in the fall of '82, that's when they started playing their first show. So they were up here in, like, September, October, November. So they played, you know, 3 shows with their original bass player, and You know, they're amazing, and that's kind of this, you know, the legendary start of their relationship with San Francisco and the Bay Area. And so, you know, so they had played November, and so I'm sure at some point, you know, Lars told me, or because I was more in touch with Lars than any of them at that point. You know, he said, like, you know, we're getting a new bassist.
Yeah, Lars had come to me and said that they wanted to upgrade their bass player, basically, and they asked me if I knew anybody. And I said, well, there's this band from San Francisco called Trauma that I saw, I don't know, a month ago or whatever it was at that time, that has a phenomenal bass player. They're coming down and playing again. This was probably, you know, a couple of weeks after Lars called me. I said, you guys should definitely come down and see him.
This band moved here for him. So
they joined him.
They joined him. So like, one, you know, it seems like natural to say that now, but like, if you think about it, like stepping away from it, like these kids from LA moved up here. So I would be in their band. And then like, you know, Cliff's parents like, wait, this band is moving here for you. But again, it kind of shows like, you know, the support system Cliff had with his family, and like, you know, them like, wow, this sounds like a good opportunity. Why, you know, and you know, if it didn't work out, he's still at home. I'm pretty sure, and I think it's verified on the band's website. They had their first rehearsal with Cliff in December of '82 at the house, and so me, Ron Quintana, a couple other people, Rich Birch, like there were maybe 6 of us in the house, and that was Cliff's first rehearsal, and that's where I saw him again. Like, you know, and you know, when I think about it now, that was all within like 10 months, 11 months. Like at the time, all those early days, I mean, even like what we were just talking about, Cliff was only in the band, you know, what, 4 years, 3 years, however long, 4 years. That it still trips me out how much happened in a very, very short amount of time.
Yeah.
So like for me with the introduction to Cliff, it was like, so, you know, I saw him with Trauma in March of that year. And then December of that same year is when he was rehearsing with Metallica. So it was that 9 months. So in that 9-month period, I saw Cliff play. I was introduced to Metallica. I got to know Metallica. I met Cliff at the end of the year. That was like 9 months. Again, the time compression, it just trips me out, because like a year from when I saw him with Trauma opening for Saxon, and a year later, almost to the day, he was playing his first show with Metallica. So that was 1 year. And then like, you know, that would be 1983. And then like they played their first shows, and then all of a sudden they were in New York recording their first album.
Metallica and Cliff came to New York to record in '83 in the beginning of the year. Was that your first time meeting them?
Yeah.
What was your impression of these guys?
I thought they were kind of quiet at first, especially Cliff. You know, I thought he was very quiet. They slept during the day, and they were up at night. But I came into the band a little bit later. They had already been there for a bit, and Scott was put them up in this place called the Music Building, where we would rehearse. And Scott gave them like a refrigerator, a microwave, and stuff. And I just think that's where the kind of friendship started from that thing, the mutual respect of, here's a band just like we are. They're already doing their record. We are trying to get to that point, you know. But like I said, there was this mutual respect of, we all had something to prove, you know, not to each other, but to the world. You know what I mean? This is, here we come.
They were staying at Johnny Z's house, and God rest Johnny Z's soul. And we lost him last week, and it's been a kind of a tough hit because we lost Marcia about a year ago. They were staying at Johnny's house, and they came over to Rock and Ray's house in Old Bridge to hang out because, you know, Johnny, you know, needed a break from those guys. And I'll never forget this long-haired, wild hair, red hair, you know, bell-bottom jeans come, you know, into the house with Lars and James and Dave Mustaine and Cliff and coming in, James, coming in the house, but there was just something special about Cliff, And what made it even more special for me was he was wearing a Leonard Skinner shirt. I was a Skinner guy, Allman Brothers. I love Southern rock. Here comes a guy, and you just look at him because I was just drawn to the guy. And when we kind of hung out, talked, and then I told him how much I liked his shirt. So we kind of hit it off, and it was just, a wild experience to meet those guys so early in their careers, So, and Cliff kind of stood out, and me and him really hung out a lot, and got high a lot, and drove around and partied and watched him bang his head to Freebird and stuff like that. Being from Metallica, but he didn't care because the music was, an inspiration. I don't care what kind of genre of music you like, as long as it gets you to a place where it makes you happy and helps you get through life. So
a year from when I first saw Metallica, they were basically on their first tour for Kill 'Em All. So I mean, I'm sure every music scene, because I love music history and history in general, and I would guess that maybe some music scenes developed as fast, but like with Metallica, it's still a mind fuck, because it's that short amount of time, within a year, less than a year of getting Cliff in the band, they are already had their first album out, had done their first tour.
And then the greatest thing about that whole thing, or the friendship, was that it always remained. And then what became the big four was, Metallica, us, Slayer, and then Megadeth. Because back those days, Dave Mustaine was still in Metallica. He was just leaving Metallica when I was kind of coming in. I'm just thinking back to those days, and it's like I'm reliving it in a way, driving to Staten Island to the venue, and dude, it's just crazy. The more I talk about it, then things start to come into my head, and I see snapshots of it.
Once the first record comes out, Kill 'Em All, I get it. Me and a buddy, the guitar player in my band, and then we're pretty much obsessed with it. And then start going and seeing them, but also seeing the guys hanging out quite a bit at the Stone. James, Jim, Cliff, Lars. I would see those guys quite a bit. Kirk would have, I would see him around. I believe at the time he was dating a girl that I knew, so we were crossing paths, stuff like that. So I was heavily in the music scene.
To me, Kill 'Em All was a more refined demo, and it was their sound realized. That's what Kill 'Em All sounded like to me. It was just, man, they were firing off every cylinder. It was just so tight, and the songs were so great. And I just remembered thinking, this is it, man. This is next level. This is where metal should be going, and it was good. And that's at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It was good.
Who look like they're a street gang kind of thing, imagery, and the statement is "Kill 'Em All." It's yeah, I'm down for that. Not that I don't like Loverboy, but no, but that was just kind of the gist of it, kind of thing. That was the era.
I think back then everybody's taking risks, just doing things that other people wouldn't normally do, because that's kind of what there was no blueprint for anything back then. So do whatever you want. And clearly, Cliff, being such a phenomenal bass player, he should have a song where he's up front. I mean, at that point, probably the best, definitely the best bass player in that scene.
Yeah, and it's and it's genuine. It wasn't forced. It's nothing was manufactured about. Nothing about Cliff was manufactured. It's not like he was like this. It's not like he was this rock star and then a marketing company came in and manufactured this image about him. That's what still kind of is interesting to me, because when you hear people talk about Cliff who never met him, or they always, their first impression is always like how genuine he was, and how approachable, and like how nothing seemed to have affected him. And like who knows what might have happened in later years. You never know what happens when fame, fortune, and all that. But I mean, the cool thing is, like, when people, since like the book came out and the movie came out, like people have asked, like, what was Cliff like? And what I always remember is, at least my memory of him, is like he's exactly how the myth is. Like, the myth about him is, he's genuine, he's down to earth, all those things. And like, in my memory, that's exactly how he was.
So he's a very Aquarian sort of guy, a little quiet, but he was extremely intelligent. And I love talking to him because, you talk to, we're all in our early 20s, we're not Rhodes Scholars, to say the least, at that time. So the conversation is, girls and music and whatever. But Cliff was really, you would get into really interesting conversations with him about, the world and politics and things that, as a 22, 23-year-old, I wasn't really thinking that much about at the time. So it was always fascinating to talk to him, because he had a really interesting outlook on things, and a different outlook on music than a lot of that too, because he had a lot of other influences that, that we weren't really necessarily there. So always fascinating guy to talk to. I always enjoyed when I got a few minutes to hang out with him, which wasn't, unfortunately, often, but it was nice when it happened.
And a lot of good times, always centered around listening to music, even if we were in a full-on rage, And the funny thing is, like, whenever I'd greet Cliff back then, we greeted each other with a headbutt, It's like, young and dumb and all that, like, yeah, bam. And one day I missed his head and I got him in the nose. I felt so bad. Like, yeah, we're drunk. He said, bam. I'm like, oh, man. Just eyes watered up immediately. Like, sorry. My aim is bad. Maybe I was a few drinks ahead of him at the moment, at the time. I don't know.
And I came in and Cliff was there with Kirk. And I sat down, just got out of driving from Pleasant, and I sat down, and Cliff grabs Kirk's guitar. Let me see that thing. He just grabs it. Cliff was, how do you say it? Cliff didn't put up with any shit, man. I mean, that guy, he was like almost running things, I mean, even though they listened to Cliff, and when he, told you to shut up, you shut up. But anyways, he grabbed Kurt's guitar and he just put the thing on. He's doing this shit to it, right? And Kurt's like, stop, Cliff, stop doing that. He goes, I hate it when you play my guitar. You play it so percussionate, And Cliff's not listening to a word. He's just like grinding on this thing, right?
Yeah, we lived there more than they did, because they started touring first. And Connie and Pam were kind of running the show, and were just like on the couches all the time. They'd come home and like, oh yeah, I forgot you guys live here.
My memories of him are all that. Like, it's not like, we have to kind of like, well, let's forget that part of Cliff. Like, he's not one of those people,
Yeah.
And I think it just kind of shows like how people still react to him.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I'm learning from everybody, that he was just like completely ages above everybody else as far as like what he talked about and what kind of stuff really piqued his interest. I mean, he loved to party like everybody else did, but he was usually more reserved than most. I've only heard of a few stories where he ever really got blasted or like super drunk. He's always been able to like maintain himself.
Yeah, I obviously partied a lot with those guys back in the day, and they certainly earned their reputation. But yeah, Cliff, I never saw Cliff really get out of hand at all. And he would kind of, usually kind of, he'd be not seen after a certain point in time when we're all still partying on. So.
And it's cool because, like, he was older than them, but he didn't. It wasn't like the cliche Guitar Center situation where like this older guy comes into the band and like, let me show you how to play Stairway to Heaven or whatever. Like, it just seemed like, again, like, it's, hindsight's 20/20, but even just trying to think back, it just didn't seem forced, it wasn't like, here's our new bass player.
Mm-hmm.
It was like he was as much a part of the band out of the gate as, anybody could have been. It's like, again, if it back then it felt like it. And like, even now, like, it feels like, it was like, how many people have said it was meant to be, sort of thing.
Not being the leader of the band because it was James and Lars's band, but as far as like the friendship between the four of them, they all looked to him for counsel on like, how do we settle this, or what should we do this way, or even so much so as James being on stage behind the mic, looking to Cliff to get that energy and that bravery to be on stage. It's like he brought them something that they were missing and was able to turn Metallica into what it's going to be for the next 40 years.
Like they became a band, like a band. It wasn't, for that time, like he brought balance, if anything, balance and whatever, guidance or whatever. But I mean, it was like lightning in a bottle, on a lot of fronts. It seems like.
As we celebrate, the life of Cliff, maybe you could do me a favor and flip back a year or two when we had Johnny and Maria and stuff talking about Cliff. We lost Johnny not too long ago, and now I know he's up in heaven with Cliff and Marcia. So maybe you could do that for me, and we take a ride back into rock and roll heaven.
Absolutely. Let's see. Give me 1 second here.
Rock and roll royalty right now, guys.
There we go.
Very, very honored to bring on this next guest, and let's keep him on this. Keep you guys on the screen as well too, because I mean, I think you guys are all pretty close to each other. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, very excited to announce Mr. Johnny Z.
Johnny! Hey, how you doing, folks? I'm hanging in there, but we're here to honor one great guy.
Amen, brother.
And that's Cliff Burton.
That's right.
And that's why I popped on. I don't have, I do have a lot of stories to tell, I guess, but I'm just going to keep it short. And because a lot of what was said about Cliff is all true. He was a real down-to-earth guy. He was a real, with his loon pants and his misfit shirt, like we all discussed, his great attitude towards life. What an attitude towards life he had. I mean, this guy really loved life. And, the thing that I had in common with him is that everybody would be drinking and carrying on. And at least with Cliff, I could sit and smoke a friggin' joint,
Amen.
And we had that in common wherever we met each other. I mean, the first words we said was, what do you got to smoke? And that became like a common bond. The story I told in the book, which to me is probably the warmest side of Cliff that I ever saw, was that he had a real compassion for the children living in my house when I had bands like Venom living there at the same time as Anvil and Raven and Metallica and all the groupies and all the tape traders and all the writers. Everywhere you went, every inch of the house was occupied by a human body dedicated to this new world and this new movement called metal. And that's the way it was in the Northeast. And Cliff used to sit down and see that, like, my children, especially my middle one, Ricky, was very displaced by the fact that this was such a madhouse, such insane Sodom and Gomorrah at one point. It was really crazy. But anyway, Cliff would basically, when Ricky went to bed, Cliff would go and read Ricky stories at night, and just to chill out a little bit. I think that was really like a very cool thing. It's not like it was a one-time thing. He took a genuine interest in the children of the Zazula family, and I thought that was a beautiful thing. Family when we were together, absolutely. And in the end, I went out to Anthrax. We were on tour with Metallica before Stockholm. And the day before they left, I was with Cliff. And we met by the Great Bullfrog. I believe that's the name of the jeweler on Carnaby Street. And we, of course, went down the alley and smoked a joint together and had a really great conversation about life and the band and where they were going. And he went off to go on tour with his band. When I got to San Francisco, that's when I found out about what happened